Hello, and welcome to the afternoon podcast. I'm here with a special guest, Rabbi Freedman. Hello, Rabbi Freedman.
Hi.
So for the people that don't know what a rabbi does, now you're a former rabbi, is that correct?
I'm always a rabbi. Once you get the degree, it's like a doctor. A doctor is always a doctor, but I'm not practicing. I'm a retired rabbi.
Okay. So what does the job of rabbi entail, for those who have no idea?
Okay, the word rabbi means teacher, and that's our main role, to teach the Jewish people what the tradition is all about. There are rabbis who are scholars. There are rabbis who are heads of congregations where they are also concerned about visiting the sick, and they're concerned about raising money for various charities and communal work. So a rabbi has, by definition, a number of different responsibilities and concerns depending on which avenue of the rabbinate he elects to follow, either teaching or writing, or perhaps being a counselor in terms of being the head of the congregation. These are all in the function of a rabbi teacher.
Can you give me any specific instances or examples of times that you've performed your duties as a rabbi?
Well, there's so many of them. Visiting the sick comes to mind because that is a very passionate kind of concern. You're going into the hospital, you're sitting next to someone who may have a terminal illness, you're trying to bring them some encouragement, you're trying to fortify their spirits, you're listening to their concerns and their complaints. You are a middleman between the patient and the patient's family, and trying to work with them as well. Eventually, God forbid, if the person passes on, you have the responsibility of speaking at the funeral service, going back to the house for special prayer services. But that comes to mind immediately because that's something that it hits you right in the heart. Also comes to mind the very many sermons that the rabbi gives. If he's a pulpit rabbi, I was a pulpit rabbi for 36 years. Gave many sermons in the high holidays, which is Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the new year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which is a full 25-hour fast. These are powerful days, and days where the entire Jewish community really tries to make amends for whatever wrongs they have done during the course of the year. And even if they hadn't attended services on a regular basis, they come to the synagogue on those days. The rabbi has to be on his best ability to give a message that they will appreciate and will motivate them. In my experience, I came to the conclusion that after a sermon, if I was speaking to one particular person, I usually try to focus on one person. The question would be in that person's mind, so what? So what did he say? What did he say? He spoke for 25 minutes. What did he say? What does he want from me? And this is a question I felt that I had to have an answer for each sermon that I gave. Some of the sermons were about the situation confronting the Jewish people in Israel, or it might have been anti-Semitism, or it might have been more devotion to studying our tradition and our Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, which we believe God, gave to and had Moses write down. So this is very, very important. So it might be an emphasis on that. It might be an emphasis on the holidays, like Shabbat, the 7th day of the week, how important it is to be together with the family, to have a meal together, to sing together, to go away from the workaday week, which is replete with all sorts of distractions, not to mention the iPhone and the telephone and the television and the movies and the newspapers and all the other things that can just drag you from place to place, giving you no time for really yourself or even your family. Here comes Shabbat. Shabbat says, hey, all those things are out of line. Today is a day of rest, a day of prayer, a day of study, a day of song, a day of eating, a day of joy, a day of celebrating, and a day of relationship with God. What does God want from me? That's the question we have to answer as well. And as rabbis, we have to answer it for ourselves, even as we have to answer it for the members of our congregation. So these are some of the responsibilities. And I always wanted to be a rabbi from a very young age. And I didn't want to be paid as a rabbi. I wanted to be an independent rabbi where the congregation would not be able to sort of say, hey, you may be the rabbi, but you know what? You're not going to tell us what to do. I had the attitude that as the rabbi, I am the religious leader. Whatever decision I make is a decision that is binding on my congregants. We had a situation on one particular occasion that had to do with kashrut, the laws of eating only special acceptable food for a Jewish person, about which I will not go into detail. And my board of directors was voting against my decision in that particular situation. I said, hey, you have two choices. One choice is to do exactly what I said, because I'm the rabbi, spiritual leader. The other choice is to fire me. The choice of going against what I say is not a choice, because that's what my contract says. I am the religious leader of the congregation. You are the people in charge of raising the funds, of having various activities, of many other things, the education programs, all sorts of very important things. But when it comes to the area of religion, I'm the rabbi. And my board of directors is not sitting in front of me. My board of directors is upstairs, and that is God. And I'm telling you, this is what I believe God wants from us. You have a choice. You accept my interpretation, or you get rid of me. Well, I was with that particular congregation for 16 years. They gave me a lifetime contract, and we eventually merged with another congregation for 5 years, and I was with them there for 21 years of my 36 years in the rabbinate.
Wow, that was a hell of an explanation. So one of the modern issues now that we're having, that I'm personally seeing, is the rise of these neo-Nazis. Obviously the situation in Charlottesville, and a couple of the synagogues there have been attacked, but it really comes off to me like the modern media has a very bad opinion of Jews, and people don't seem to really understand. So given the events of Charlottesville, neo-Nazi protesting and modern crucifixion of Israel in the media, what is your opinion on anti-Semitism in the United States? Do you think it's rising? Do you think it's a global issue?
Well, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, has said that there have been a lot of incidents, but it's really pretty much the same as it always has been. Europe is a different story. There's been an influx in Europe of a lot of people from Algeria and some of those locales where there is a lot of suspicion about the Jews or hatred towards the Jews because of maybe the Palestinian situation. But if we look at the anti-Semitism as a whole over the centuries, we go back many, many years ago, and we see that it's been around for thousands of years. And the answer is people are afraid of what they really don't know. And the Jewish people, they don't know the Jewish people. We're only 13 million of the entire world population, which is a very small number. And most people have never even met a Jew. They don't know anything about a Jew. But they do know that the Jews do not follow Jesus. That they know. They've been taught that. And they've been taught that's a terrible sin, a terrible crime for which the Jewish people have to pay consequences. Perhaps they have to be eternally exiled from their land, although that we see in modern times has changed. Perhaps they have to undergo various tortures and things of that nature. And perhaps they have to be forced to convert. Perhaps they have to be exiled from the country that they lived in for hundreds of years, like Spain and other countries of that nature. But they are different. They're not like us. They're not Muslim. They don't follow Allah. They're not. And here's the worst thing about the Jews. Judah Bauer, in his book on anti-Semitism and the history of it, points out something very interesting. And that is that when it comes to why the Jewish people have been singled out, it's really because that the Jews did not fight back immediately. Once there is something done, they have to fight back immediately. You don't wait. We have the history of Nazi Germany, 1933 through 1939, terrible events taking place in Germany, building up for war, and at the same time, Kristallnacht in 1938, synagogues, 93 synagogues destroyed, 100 Jews killed, terrible events took place. The world was quiet. The world was quiet. There was an article, but Hitler was intent on destroying the Jewish people once and for all. He saw the Jewish people as being the cause, so he said, of all the maladies that took place in Germany. It was easy to frame the Jews because the Jews were not part of body politic. The Jews were not a majority. The Jews were a minority. And despite the fact that they were professors, and they were doctors, and they were lawyers, and they were contributors to society, and they were writers, and they were involved in the community and productive in the community, nevertheless, they were seen as outsiders, as aliens, with their own traditions and their own things that they did. Now, here's what Yehuda Bauer said. He said, every nation that lost the war in ancient times understood that they lost the war because their God wasn't as strong as the God that they opposed. Therefore, the rules were, not written but understood, that they had to convert, they had to accept the God of the nation that defeated them. It's a logical thing. Our God lost, your God won. We are now loyal to your God. Your God is the God. He is the God. Here comes the Jews. The Jews are defeated in war. The Jews are brought into exile. The Jews are treated like slaves, like Untermenschen. They're treated like people who are not even human beings. And yet, they maintain their faith in their own God. What kind of business is that? That's ridiculous. No one does that. The Jewish people did that. The Jewish people said, our God is the only God, and we have perhaps done him wrong, and perhaps we are being punished by him, but he is our God, and we will be faithful to him. No nation had that kind of philosophy. They were disdained because of it, and that's been the history. But I think in the United States, there's an awareness, there's a support of Israel, but in Europe, it's a different story. In Europe, once again, we have this rise of anti-Semitism and bitter hatred of one sect against another, something that all of us have to abhor and try to overcome.
Do you think any of this anti-Semitism in Europe is due to the massive increase in Islamic refugees?
Absolutely. I think there's no question about it. There are places that Jews cannot go. Jews now have, of course, they have, and the synagogues have been bombed and attacked. Individuals have been beaten and have been killed and murdered. Yeah, I think Muslim fundamentalism is part of it. But the Jews lived under Muslim rule for many, many years and peacefully. Now there is a sect, and I would say a small one, maybe even less than 1%, nevertheless very active, very strong, very determined, of people who want to see an entire change in world behavior. They want to take over the world. They want Sharia law, which is part of their Muslim code. They want fundamentalism.
Excuse me, let me interrupt you there. For those who don't know what Sharia law, what can you?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, Sharia law is laws based on the Quran, which go back to the time of Muhammad, which he supposedly wrote the Quran, and they're very harsh. They're harsh in terms of the relationship between a husband and a wife, how many wives he may have, how he can treat his wife, including hitting her, but not causing any kind of disfigurement in terms of her face. There are laws with regard to a person who may steal. If he's stealing and he's caught, you chop off his hand. There are laws with regard to a person who may commit adultery. He's taken and stoned to death. There are laws having to do with family pride, where a woman doesn't listen to what her father and her mother wants for her, and therefore she has really brought dishonor to her family. She can be killed, and that's considered an honor killing, and therefore there is no retribution. It's so backward in terms of modern times, and yet This is what they're trying to foist on other people, and they're getting adherence, unfortunately.
So you're saying they still practice this to this day? They're in full?
Many still practice this to this day, even in I think maybe Dearborn, Michigan, where they have a large, Arab group, and there are some people who will not go into certain Arab neighborhoods for fear that they may fall under this fundamentalist teaching and do something that is inappropriate, and who knows what will happen to them. Even the police try to stay away. That's not what America was built on. America was built on openness and transparency and equality and democracy. That doesn't fit with Sharia law. That doesn't fit with this kind of Muslim fundamentalist terrorism. Now, this fear of the unknown or the other is not relegated only to anti-Semites. I think each person has it within them. I'm reminded when I was 15 years old and traveled from Philadelphia to New York, where I went to high school and then college. I had to travel, walk from the subway station to my school. It was about a mile. And whenever I saw somebody walking from the opposite direction towards me, and it turned out to be a black man, I started to shiver and shake. I felt for sure he was going to somehow attack me. Now, it was irrational. It was unfair. It was prejudicial. It wasn't anti-black man. It was anti-stranger, anti-other. It was simply a fear that I had. It came from somewhere inside. I didn't hate that person. I didn't dislike that person. And yet I suspected that person. Was it cultural? Was it something that I learned from my parents and grandparents? Who knows? But I want to bring out a point which is very essential. There was a tremendous concern by the Haitian community in Miami that the United States government was turning back Haitians who were trying to flee their country because of the dictatorship there, and so they were fleeing for political reasons, versus the fact that the Cubans, who were also being treated very harshly by Castro, were allowed to come into this country without any kind of concern. I mean, they brought in thousands of Cubans into Florida, and yet they took the Haitians on the high seas and brought them back to Haiti. And so the Haitians decided to have a rally against the government, saying that this is prejudicial. I mean, this is wrong. Is it because of our skin that we are being treated this way? Now, Miami had about, between Miami and Everon's, about 100 rabbis. 2 rabbis decided to attend the rally. One was a Reform rabbi, Rabbi Kingsley. The other was an Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Simcha Freedman. And they asked me to speak. And I got up there and said, listen, I want you to understand something very clearly. I'm not here because I love black people. I'm not here because I love all of you. I'm here because my Torah tells me, my teaching tells me, my tradition tells me that we are brothers. We are brothers and sisters. I don't have to like you. I have to respect you. I have to honor you. I have to have regard for you. I have to have concern for you, even as I have for my own self, because you are equal to me. I'm here because what is happening is an injustice to you, so it's an injustice to me. That's why I'm here, because of that tradition. Now, I have to tell you, I told them, sometimes when I see a person of different color, I fear. It's ridiculous. I know it's wrong, but I fear. But I overcome my fear, because my fear is unwarranted, unnecessary, and inappropriate. So I will do everything I can to help you in your fight against the government, because it is not treating you fairly. Oh, they gave me such applause. But I said it from the heart. This is what I believe. This is what I believe our tradition tells us. That's the greatness of our tradition. One point, the Talmud says, why did God create...
Sorry, what's the Talmud?
Oh, the book of Jewish law says, it's a book of the Talmud which explains the Torah. It says that God created man and woman and said, be fruitful, multiply. It says it right there in the Bible, in Genesis. And the rabbis in the Talmud debate that and said, listen, God wanted a large community. He said to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Why didn't he just create 100 men and 100 women? Why didn't he create 10,000? God could do it. He created the planets, created the universe. Do it. The answer is, say the rabbis, so that no one can say my father was greater than your father. We have the same father, Adam, and the same mother, Eve. We are related to one another. All the people in the world, the people you like, the people you don't like, the Democrats and the Republicans, all of them are one family of humankind. This is what God said, and that's why He created one man and woman. What a beautiful thought. It's not only a thought, it's a tradition, it's a teaching, and it's an obligation.
So my personal experience with Christianity is it's only really the people who come and bother me when I'm at home. They knock on my door and they leave flyers if I'm not there, and they wait until I answer the door, often waking me up and ringing the doorbell to kind of flog what they're selling in their religion. Is that the case with Judaism? Is that a practice in Judaism? I mean,
Well, a long time ago, Jews were involved in active missionary work, not trying hard to convince other people, but certainly being more willing to accept people who are not Jewish into the Jewish fold. The Christians do not have...
raising awareness, essentially.
More than that, explaining, expounding, and trying to make people understand where they were coming from, removing some of the mysteries. Let me give you a quick anecdote. My first congregation was Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, a small town about 100 miles outside of Philadelphia, and 65 Jewish families. And we had a beautiful little synagogue there. And one morning, I was called by the president of the congregation. He said, "Rabbi, meet us over at the synagogue. There's a problem." I went over to the synagogue, and there was the problem. A big swastika was painted on the door of the synagogue. I was shocked. I'd been there already for about a year, and I didn't see the community as being one that would have this kind of attitude. I mean, the people were very friendly. People didn't even lock their doors. I remember my car was stuck in the ice. People came running over to push the car. It was a beautiful community in that way, although it was a Catholic community, and the Catholics are a little bit more firm in their belief in God and their tradition. Still, there was no way of finding out who was involved in this particular uncivil act. I said, let's call the ADL and the Defamation League. The Jewish businessmen said, forget that. And within 2 hours, it was painted over, and they said, don't mention it to anybody, don't do anything about it. We don't want to raise the issue of anti-Semitism here. It's a quiet community, that's it. But it wasn't it for me. I wasn't satisfied. So I got the names of 65 churches in this town of 10,000 people, and I wrote 65 letters to the 65 leaders of the church. And I said in the letter, I'm a new rabbi in town, and I thought it might be nice if perhaps you would like to come to our synagogue any day during the week, except for the Sabbath, and see what the synagogue is all about. I want to show you the Torah. I want to explain certain things about what we stand for, and I want to answer the questions that children may have about what Judaism is all about. I want to show them that I don't have horns, as in Michelangelo's statue of Moses. I want to be able to respond to some of the questions that people may have about what the Jews are. And I sent it out, and about 20 of the churches agreed to visit. And they came, and the kids sat there. These were high school kids, maybe 15, 16, 17. And they sat there with their mouths open. And they said, you know what? It's very similar to what we do. with the ark and with the standing for certain kind of prayers, and with the use of prayers from what they would call the Old Testament, the Book of Psalms. These were things that they were familiar with. And I took off my kippah, my head covering, and said, look, there are no horns. That was a mistranslation. And then they asked questions, and they went away. This was my way of trying to overcome, which I felt was really based on ignorance more than hatred. Ignorance. And therefore we have to educate. And those that are willing to be educated will become people who will respect the Jewish people for what they are.
If you had any one thing that you wanted people to take away from this interview, what would it be?
It would be the phrase found in the book of Leviticus, which says in Hebrew, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," which means love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus also quotes it, by the way, in the so-called New Testament as being one of the most important sentences in the entire Old Testament. It means that we have to have a relationship with our fellow human being as we would have even with ourselves. Now, we love ourselves probably more than anything else. So it's not a question of love. It's a question of what we do, how we act. Kamocho means act towards the other person as you would have him act towards you. And that's a beautiful concept which we are not applying in the world today, unfortunately. The word v'yahavto comes from the Hebrew hav. Hav means to give. In order to get, you have to give. And that's the way the world can improve itself. And that's the hope we have for the future of humankind.
Wow, that's a hell of a point. Well, it's been great having you here, Rabbi Freedman. We hope to see you again in the future.
Hope to be here again.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.